You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, 3 p.m. Sunday, December 3rd, 2023. Today, we have a bittersweet session for you because we're going to be playing the finale. We've gotten the fifth and final letter from the custom, what are we calling it? Interactive Mystery by Mail game series that we've invented here. Written by one of the viewers of the channel, MattC, who's here with us in the chat and is going to stick around at the end of today's session to do a little interview with me, live on screen, split screen. I'm excited to try that. We've never done that on the channel before. So let me just go over what we're going to do today. We're going to read this final letter, and then we're going to discuss it. And then we'll take a little break. Maybe that'll take us an hour. We'll take a little break, or maybe less since we don't have any decisions to make today. We'll take a little break, 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. And if all goes well and the technology works, MattC will be split screened with me to talk about the process of creating this case, which he's done on the fly week by week over the last month and a half. I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask Matt about, and so that may be the most interesting part of this stream. Well, the letter itself is also going to be interesting. Okay, so that's what we're doing today. A little bit of bookkeeping first. I was away for a week, but I put up 3 videos in the meantime, reviews of games that we've played on the channel in the last couple months. I put up a review of True Crime Stories, which you see behind me here. A review of 3 subscription escape room boxes that we played that were new to all of us, I think, most of us. And a review of the Sherlock Files, a little card-based mystery game that you haven't seen me play on the channel, but I'm quite fond of. A reminder, we have sort of an informal contract here on the channel. If you play these games along with me on the channel, I do want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts after we play them, and I'd love to see your thoughts on the videos afterwards, just to offer a sort of second opinion, especially if you disagree with me about a certain video, or if you liked it and I didn't, or vice versa. I would appreciate if you'd leave your comments on the YouTube videos, and of course a thumbs up always helps as well. Okay, I can see that we've got the normal suspects here in the chat. YouTube says there are 15 concurrent viewers and 7 likes on this video. Okay, anything else we need to talk about before we get started? I guess in terms of plans going forward in December, there's one big thing we're going to try to do in December, which is we're going to finally try to play the most expensive mystery game that I own, which is a mystery by a company called Cozy Killer. And this is like a $300, $400 box of 12 episodes. They have maybe 4 different versions of this, 4 different series. One is quite well respected. I think that's Inheritance of Murder, something like that. But we're playing The Hidden Listener, which is a World War II, I believe, 1940s set. And there are no reviews, essentially, of these series, which is crazy. But we're going to try to play it starting December 18th. Jonathan Warner has decided that's our start date. And it may take us 12 days, 2 weeks or so. If we play one box, there's 12 boxes, 1 box per day. Some of the boxes in the beginning will probably take more than 1 session. Some will go faster. I'm very curious to see how it goes. If it goes well, then we might consider playing through some of the others, although it really is a marathon experience. Anything else to talk about? Next week, I believe I will do a channel update. I try to do these every 4 months. So if you have questions for me about the channel, we'll just talk about whatever. That'll be next week. And then the week after, I'll be doing finally another game development design update stream discussing game design elements, focusing on High and Low, the detective mystery game I'm working on. I hope by December 15th, I will have reached an important milestone there, and I'm excited to talk to you about that and about some of the art and show off some different stuff. Whoops. So Mark says, any hope for a future series from a member? Well, I keep talking in there. We've got a Discord that you can join. There's a link on the About page. And I keep telling Matt and Rob and Debbie, maybe it's time to start a new play-by-mail company since these are so rare. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, let's get to business and recap last week's letter. let's see what we've got here. So the channel, we only sort of drafted on the channel our reply. So I think it pays to read the reply we sent, but maybe we should refresh our memory about the last letter we got. So Watson has given us a report in the last letter. He basically says the cab company depot is chaotic. We finally got in to see Abernathy, and it was clear he was an opium addict, which made sense. That's why he was letting them use the cab company as opium delivery, which is what we figured out. And he was hauled off to the doctor, and in his pocket was a note, not in his pocket, folded piece of paper in a desk called NW: add 5358 Houston. We weren't exactly sure what that meant. Euston is a street in London, so we thought maybe this was a note to him to add 58 Euston to the opium delivery routes. And then Watson gave us a nice little summary of what he wanted from us, which is nice. Dear Holmes has started doing this as well. He basically says, here are the following issues that are open. 1, find Peter Harrington, who's gone missing. And I have a question for the chat, whether you think we're going to find him alive, dead, whatever. Uncover the opium operation. Identify an address for the police to raid. Determine Peter Harrington's involvement and take what actions we consider necessary. This is an interesting moral choice we're faced with, and we'll talk about that. And then Watson is continuing. I may have done this stapled this wrong. Maybe this came next. Okay, so Abernathy got treated. Peter Harrington is missing. He's passing along our request to go through the logs. I had a brilliant idea the week before last. Brilliant idea that didn't come up in the discussion, but I thought of it right when I was formulating the reply, which is if we check the cab logs, we should find either a central source that the cabs are leaving from that would indicate an opium distribution, or if we think that the cabs are bringing opium users to opium dens, we should see opposite pattern, with the destinations being common and pickups from being all over. Okay, and then Peter Harrington is missing. We asked them to go check out Percival's home. Wiggins found Percival's home and found him dead and staged in a really fun, curious way. We asked Wiggins to break in with his lockpick set, which comes up occasionally in Holmes cases with Wiggins, and he says, Mr. Holmes doesn't usually ask me to break the law, but he tried to look in from the windows and calls the cops. Okay. And they found this interesting scene, and they found a note, and then the cab logs showed all these couple unusual places, and we got this map showing the unusual places of activity, and you can see they're all sort of have this common hub of O. It looks like O branches out, and then each place it goes has 2 more. And so we figured this is the opium distribution center. It's right next to the Southwark docks. That's probably where they're offloading the opium and then distributing it to the dealers and dens. And then we found this cryptic note inside Percival Thorne's house. Percival Thorne was found dead, suffocated, but staged, looked like he was dead while writing his final notes. But we figured out, we decrypted this. It was a little rhyme. It said, a shilling to spend for an ache to mend, nothing left but a rhyme to waste precious time, JM. And we realized, okay, this is a note from Moriarty taunting us. That's why the body was staged. It wasn't immediately clear that it was staged, but we figured out it was staged. And then a crumpled up note in Percival Thorne's room about a very funny reply that he was writing to Whitcomb, who we asked to go pretend he was interested. And it's basically just hyping up this fake investment. And pretty funny, but this clarified for us that the investment was all fake and there really is no Uncle Robert, whatever. Okay, so Harrington's missing. We've uncovered the last details, we think, of the opium plot, and we had a tough decision. We could have tried to stretch out the case for an additional week. It was clear, it wasn't 100% clear, but it was interestingly framed by Matt to be like, well, time is running out, Peter Harrington's in danger, but maybe we could have asked for a couple more leads. We sort of balanced it all and decided this last letter was big and rich with the maps. It felt like it was appropriate for a finale. So we took that to heart and we wrote a letter to Watson under those, in that context. And here's the letter we wrote. It says, Dr. Watson, we write to give you our final recommendations regarding the Harrington case. We agree with your assessment that time is of the essence if we are to avoid the unfortunate conclusion to the matter. We therefore expect that this will be our last opportunity to provide guidance. We suggest you brief Lestrade and Scotland Yard immediately on what we believe to be the location of a major criminal opium distribution operation in East London, located on Union Road, near Club Chap, the Ark, and Culling Road. I mentioned some specific places around that location in case they're useful to Lestrade. A specific street address may be provided by Edmund Whitcomb based on his analysis of the driver logs, but we suspect it will be quite easy to identify the specific building due to an unusual amount of traffic to and fro. Please note that the utmost care must be taken in raiding this establishment, as we believe it is being run under the guidance of Professor James Moriarty, a man whom Holmes can attest is not to be trifled with. Moriarty is also responsible for the death of Percival Thorne. Holmes can confirm and elaborate. We note additionally that the proximity of this location to the Surrey commercial docks suggests that a careful stakeout might reveal which ships are suppliers of the opium. Furthermore, if Lestrade is truly interested in reducing opium use in London, he would do well to conduct timely investigations of the lettered locations on Edmund Whitcomb's map. We believe they are locations for additional distribution hubs and possible opium dens. However, prior to any police raid, we must insist that every attempt be made to locate Peter Harrington, who we feel may well be held by the criminals masterminding this case, in order to keep him from revealing details of their operation. To this end, we would like to suggest the following steps be taken to search for Mr. Harrington prior to any police raid. First, have Edmund Whitcomb urgently check the cab office for any notes about his last fare or destination, and ask around for any cabbies who may know of Peter's last ride. Send police or Wiggins if a location can be identified. Use caution when approaching. Next, likely locations are 58 Euston Road, address found in Abernathy's office, and possible location of the newest opium den, ? As well as locations A and E on Edmund's map, Chiswell Street and Tenor Street, respectively. We do not yet know how these last two locations relate to our case, but they seem promising candidates. These were places on the map that we did not really understand how they fit in. These were the common locations. All the activity is going back and forth. And A and E, there's movement back and forth, but we didn't really understand why, just that it didn't fit our pattern. It could be nothing or it could be important, so we just pointed that out. Peter Harrington may in fact be forcibly held at one of these locations. If Peter Harrington cannot be found in one of these locations or any other identified by Whitcomb, we believe it would be prudent for the police to raid the Union Road station without delay and with vigor and in force, while we still have the element of surprise on our side. Peter Harrington may in fact be at the Union Road site, and we fear any further delays may only put his life in danger should the criminals have time to clean up any loose ends. Lastly, you asked for our assessment of Peter's involvement in this criminal enterprise. It seems clear to us that he has become involved, and knowingly so, in the opium distribution, though for what were initially selfless motivations regarding his son's education fund and not without remorse. He may even have been considering going to the police and turning in the criminals. At this point, saving his life is the best we can do for Mrs. Harrington, and we must therefore let the chips fall where they may. Surely it would be better for our client if Peter Harrington is alive and in jail, rather than missing and presumed dead at the bottom of the Thames. We anxiously await your reply. Our fondest hope is that the case concludes without further bloodshed, and with the final return of Mr. Harrington to his wife, in spirit, if not in body. So this was part of we've had a bunch of debates about how involved Peter Harrington is. I think the evidence, that, as we've discussed it, suggests that Peter Harrington must know about this. There was some debate amongst us whether Peter Harrington could be just trying to help out Percival Thorne from an opium addiction, but then we discussed reasons why we didn't believe that to be the case, namely that Percival Thorne was still peddling his fake investments, and Peter Harrington was demonstrating he knew things were wrong. But before we read today's reply, I do want to get everyone in the chat on record. You've got your final chance now to disagree with our conclusions. If you think it's going to turn out that Peter Harrington was not involved, we thought about, could Peter Harrington be working for Holmes? We know Holmes is involved, but all the evidence to me seems like Peter Harrington just got caught up the way people do in this criminal operation, probably tried to break free and got captured, etc. Macon Weary points out A&E could be entirely legitimate cab business with regular clients. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So you've got your last chance to put in the comments whether you think we got something wrong, and people can vote if you think Peter Harrington's going to end up dead or not. Some of that ending is going to depend on Matt and how he thinks it's fair to end a case. Is he going to reveal that we missed big chunks and we messed up? Or it's going to? I can't wait to talk to Matt at the end to find out what he changed, etc. But that was our last letter. That's our reply. And now we have the last actual reply from 221B Baker Street. Okay, did I miss anything? Anything else need to be said before we open this? Anyone want to get on record disagreeing with our conclusions? Let's just check in with the chat and see if anyone wants to get on the record. I mean, he made a bad investment, has only stayed involved after finding out about the opium because it's his only chance of getting his money back, keeping his wife from finding out he lost their savings. Yes, Emmy is summarizing how I think it went. He invested the money, found out it was a scam. Now he's doing this to make up the money because he's terribly ashamed of having lost his son's financial education fund. I agree. Yeah, let's not forget, we do believe that he initially got sucked in here because he lost his kid's education fund to Percival Thorne, and this is his last resort to get that money back. Okay, sounds like most in the channel agree, and hopefully he's going to be found alive. All right, let us open up the letter and see what we got here. All right, so we have a letter from the desk of Sherlock Holmes, a police report, and another letter. Let's just go through these in turn here. All right, there's a police report. This may be the report about the result of the raids that we advised them to take, or something else. Hopefully it's not a report of Peter Harrington's death. Okay, Metropolitan Police, November 18, about subject the raids. Dear Mr. Reichler, the raids you suggested were a resounding success. It is fortunate that we acted quickly. I want to thank you and your associates for bringing these locations to me so we could finally eliminate opium from the streets of London. I'm not usually so willing to jump on leads suggested by Holmes and his associates without concrete evidence, but given the pressures Scotland Yard is under, I found it appropriate in this circumstance. If you had chosen incorrectly, there likely would have been political repercussions for both of us. 58 Euston Road was found to be an opium den. I was forwarded this location from Dr. Watson. He explained that it was our best chance of finding Harrington based on the information gathered this morning by Edmund Whitcomb at the cab depot. This location was added to Peter Harrington's fares the day he went missing. My team arrested a well-built man with a bandaged arm watching the door and raided the building. We found Peter Harrington inside, amongst others, and an abundance of opium amidst the foul, stagnant air. He's alive. Most of the inhabitants were intoxicated, but we found Harrington in a horrible state, lying on the floor. His symptoms matched those of Mr. Abernathy's opium withdrawal. So he was addicted to opium, but maybe they forced him to get addicted. We don't know. He weakly rose to his feet and tearfully demanded to know where his family was. I explained that his family was safe at Scotland Yard and he was taken to Dr. Watson's clinic to recover. As we were making arrests, I searched the property, and as I made my way outside, I noticed a garden and flower patch to the rear. Upon closer inspection, we realized the damned poppies were being grown right in the garden. Having secured Peter Harrington, I immediately launched a raid at Union Street. As you suspected, the warehouse we found was central to the opium operation. But we were astonished to find an entire processing facility. Among those arrested was another bandaged man with a scar on his cheek, matching the description I was sent from Dr. Watson. It looks like he had taken quite a beating, with blood soaking straight through his bandages. That's the beating that they took at the pub at the Pickled Egg from Holmes, we think. We're still working out the charges, but I'm sure you or Sherlock Holmes will have your own theories. In the meantime, we are conducting raids on the other identified locations. Thank you again for your assistance. Let this be the end of it. Best regards, Inspector G. Lestrade. P.S. I understand your eyesight is declining, so for your benefit, I installed a fresh typewriter ribbon today. That's a little comment about having a hard time reading the typewriter ribbon last time. What does that say? It's just a little note. Okay. Well, that was pretty great. So the last place that was in Abernathy's office, thank God we followed up that lead to interview Abernathy. Remember, I was reluctant to do that, but that turned out to crack the case because he had the address of the opium den where Harrington was being held. Still not clear if Harrington was a voluntary opium user and addict, and that's partly why he got caught up in this. I'm not sure why we didn't really entertain that much, or they may have just taken advantage of him, but it sounds like Peter Harrington got caught up in opium as well. But we found him, we recovered him, and the Union Road station was the central warehouse we told them about. Worked out great. Pretty awesome. Okay. Next up, we've got a letter from Sherlock Holmes on some very fancy letterhead. Oh my God, look at Holmes's letterhead. Color printing, a little photograph, or very carefully drawn artist rendering of 221B Baker Street. Wow, he spared no expense with this letterhead. 221B Baker Street. We're finally talking to Holmes. November 21st, 1889. Detective Reichler, I apologize for the lateness of this introduction. For several weeks, I have been investigating a case brought to me by my brother Mycroft. To share the details would displease my brother, and they are hardly relevant. In summary, I was to find an important individual and prevent an embarrassing situation from seeing the light of day. This search led me into a criminal conspiracy developing in London. I have put some effort into infiltrating this conspiracy and bringing the ringleaders to justice. But my focus on the larger picture and the extremely broad net Lestrade intended to cast left little room for happy endings. The case of Peter Harrington intrigued me. It was clearly connected to the opiate conspiracy, but seemed out of character for the man. I entrusted this case to you to potentially save an innocent man from the large boot of justice about to crush all involved. Underfoot. I have reviewed the details of the case you collected and shall now present the conclusions I have formed. Some will involve my own investigation into the larger opium conspiracy. The conspiracy. This trouble began with a short-sighted effort to crack down on opiates. Going against my recommendations, our friend Inspector Lestrade paraded his men through London and clubbed at anything that began with the letter O. This had the predictable side effect of pushing opiates down into the criminal underworld. With several distributors arrested, a vacuum was formed. An ambitious florist named Charles Miller believed he could fill this vacuum by growing the flowers himself in London. I confirmed as much at the Land Registry Office, finding Miller's name on properties along the web shown on Whitcomb's map. The authorities have taken Mr. Miller into custody. Mr. Miller hardly considered his ambitions feasible until he was contacted by agents of Professor James Moriarty. I have not ascertained their exact relationship, but it pains me to say that Moriarty is also a consultant of sorts, feeding stratagems and muscle to the underworld of London. His clients hardly understand that they serve as temporary vessels until they are left to fall on the sword. The flowers were grown at properties purchased and managed by Miller, subsequently converted into opium dens. Carriages were then used to shuttle the flowers into a refinement center at Union Street, with the finished product returning back to the dens. Occasionally, frequent customers were also shuttled to the dens. The entire operation was quite traceable. Perhaps it was always meant to be short-lived but highly profitable. The dependency which opium creates can be a weapon of control. Moriarty saw this and targeted Andrew Abernathy. He was supplied opiates and made to rely on them, to the point where his company could be used as a front while he remained obedient. You may have ascertained by now that this conspiracy is not limited to northeast London. Abernathy drivers were positioned in each neighborhood of the city. Percival Thorne smuggled for the northeast, while Lloyd Kent smuggled for the southwest. I have identified 5 districts of operation in the city. As the operation grew, the Abernathy Cab Company fell further into chaos, relying on drivers like John Rutherford and Edmund Whitcomb to take on additional workloads. The drivers. Percival Thorne, an Abernathy driver in northeast London, was helping to shuttle opiates for the conspirators. He and several others were paid for this and were likely not told what they were transporting. At some point, Thorne must have discovered the product he was delivering and sampled it for himself. Knowing that the supplies were tightly monitored, his only recourse to continue doing so was to become a customer of the dens, quickly burning through his earnings. Short on funds and desperate for more time in the dens, Thorne became more erratic. He invented a false financial investment to lure others into funding his habit, run by an imaginary Uncle Robert. But Thorne was pocketing and consuming the money he was handed. This is evident from the discarded letter behind Thorne's typewriter and the death certificate of Robert Thorne. Unfortunately, the kind and agreeable Peter Harrington was the perfect victim for this scam. Perhaps it was genuine but twisted sympathy for Harrington, but as the operation grew and more drivers were needed, Thorne approached Peter and offered him a way to make his money back. Harrington was likely unaware of the contents of his shipments at first, but eventually his moral fortitude outweighed the desperation to regain his son's lost education fund, and he uncovered the truth of his involvement in an opium smuggling ring. Tragically, Harrington was such an effective driver that he could not be allowed to walk away. Unmotivated by greed and physical intimidation, a message was instead sent by the conspirators in the form of a poppy at his family's doorstep. A threat. Harrington ashamedly continued the deliveries, speaking nothing of his involvement for fear of his family's well-being. He was a free-roaming prisoner of Miller and Moriarty. Meanwhile, as Thorne continued to draw attention to himself, he was eliminated by Moriarty for his indiscretion, while Peter Harrington took his place. The investigation. This investigation presented several ethical dilemmas. Each step closer to the truth unknowingly placed Harrington in greater danger. Charles Miller first became aware of the investigation when Wiggins inquired with florists around London about poppies. Arthur Hill likely spoke with Miller and asked him for information about the poppies. Miller would have been alarmed by this and informed Moriarty. The professor sent 2 of his men to the Pickled Egg to cozy up to the notorious gossip Whip and learn what they could. As you previously deduced, I had the same idea, and spent some time in the tavern listening in on Whip. It is fortunate that I was there to intervene and dispatch Moriarty's henchmen before they could harm our dear friend Wiggins. However, I could do little else to prevent the details of Wiggins' interview from reaching Moriarty without jeopardizing my investigation. So I put my trust in you to protect Harrington as I maintained my cover. Thorne's fate was already sealed once he became a liability. He was visited that evening at his home by Moriarty's contact. It can be deduced from the absence of forced entry or signs of a struggle that Thorne knew his assailant. His contact kindly gifted him a final moment of ecstasy in the form of a pipe and tin, smothering him with a pillow once he was docile and sedated. As you've already deduced, Thorne's body was staged at his desk. I must give some credit to the professor for finding inventive ways to waste our time. The pillow was the obvious murder weapon, but suffocation would only explain one side of the bloodied pillow. The other side? Open wounds from an assailant still healing from a fresh beating. If the unfortunate fool knew how to counter Baratsu, perhaps he would have escaped undetected. The man with the scarred cheek fits this quite nicely. The other brute from the Pickled Egg went after Harrington. Knowing that our investigation was closing in on him, he needed to be silenced. He was abducted along his route and brought to a new den at Euston Road. Harrington could have been brought to any den, but a new location was less likely to have been compromised by our investigation. As Whitcomb discovered, this location was added to his route at the last moment on November 14th and given to Abernathy as a new drop-off location. Once there, Moriarty's henchmen attempted to drug Harrington into compliance, as they did with Abernathy, but failed to make him a willing puppet. Unlike Thorne, Harrington continued to complete his task efficiently up until he was captured. Perhaps Moriarty kept him alive because he still has some use for him. I would also like to think he generally respected his moral consistency, but I will refrain from crediting my enemy. I should explain the map provided by Whitcomb. The origin of the distribution is immediately evident at Union Street. From there, you can see the 4 opium dens in northeast London branching out from it. Rides were recorded in both directions of each branch. Also recall that the logs only showed Thorne and Harrington's activity. A complete map would show additional networks all branching out from the warehouse at Union Street. From there, the remaining branches show consistent customers of the opium dens, likely important individuals. My brother will take some interest in this. In your letter to Watson, you identified 2 locations unconnected to the network. This was simply a frequent and loyal customer of Harrington, but also served as an ambush point where Harrington was later abducted. Interesting. Watson and I congratulate you on your efforts, Detective. You accepted a demanding case with modest beginnings. You did not quite deduce the circumstance which explained Peter Harrington's knowing involvement, but I was able to tie up this loose end using the evidence you gathered. Perhaps this final piece required the world's greatest detective. What matters most is you acted quickly to save Harrington and wasted no time on this. You did not lose sight of your mission to protect Mrs. Harrington's interests while I brought down Miller. It is fair to say Peter Harrington only acted to protect his family and did not aid the conspirators for personal gain or even to help his son Daniel. He attempted to do the right thing every step of the way. His only misstep was agreeing to assist Thorne before fully understanding the consequences. He did have to spend a few days in prison before I eventually sent my conclusions to Lestrade. Perhaps you could have spared him the inconvenience if you had beaten me to it. Regardless, I think Scotland Yard will find it quite difficult to pin a crime on a man who has not broken any laws. Remember, the use and transport of opium is not technically illegal, and it was in any case done under duress. Harrington was initially reluctant to confirm the facts of the case, but once I laid them out clearly and demonstrated that the threat to his family had passed, he began to cooperate. As long as Lestrade continues his fool's errand, Moriarty is sure to find new ways to introduce opiates to London. Perhaps subsequent attempts will present opportunities to finally expose him. Any evidence connecting him to the conspiracy remains circumstantial as always. For now, we have suppressed an opium epidemic. Watson has made clear the horrible consequences of this substance. I personally hope that the publicity generated by our efforts will shine a light on the horrors of opiates. Perhaps this city will turn to a healthier alternative with proven benefits, such as cocaine. Look for future assignments from my desk. Excellent work. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And a little wax seal here. Okay. All right, that was pretty amazing. I love how he says, you missed the one detail, but, maybe only I'm going to be able to handle that kind of thing. It's interesting, Charles Miller, who we identified early, but we told him to follow up. I think Charles Miller was the person outside of London, and I believe we found out about him from the florist, and we were concerned about costs. So we said, look, don't go all the way out to talk to Charles Miller. It's not that important, but that's very interesting. And they tried to get him addicted to opium. It didn't quite take, although they did mess him up a bit. Pretty fantastic. All right, so we've got one more letter in our envelope. In addition to the Sherlock Holmes letter, a final letter here. Let's see what this is. It's a letter from Isabel Harrington. All right, let's see if she's going to be mad at us or happy with us. Isabel Harrington, Friday, November 22nd, 1889, 6 Clipstone Street, London. Dear Mr. Reichler, Dr. Watson informed us that you were responsible for bringing this nightmare to an end. Peter and I would like to thank you for your help. Everything has become much clearer now that I understand the danger my husband was in. I wish he had told us what was going on from the beginning. Peter has always been driven to prove my parents wrong and provide for Daniel, and he feared losing me if I discovered the mistakes he had made. He could not be more wrong. It will take some time to repair our trust, but I can forgive Peter for doing what he thought was right to protect us. Edmund has been spending more time with Peter. The two of them have been talking about opening a carriage company of their own. Now that Abernathy's company is gone, there's room for a new one to step in. I do hope this proves fruitful, but Peter has nothing to prove to me. Of course, there is the matter of your payment. We do not have much to offer, given the financial troubles you uncovered, but Peter and Edmund would like to offer you a share in the new Harrington Whitcomb Carriage Company. I hope you will accept it. Otherwise, know that your efforts saved our family. We will always be grateful for this. Sincerely, Isabel Harrington. Okay, so before I offer some thoughts here, Emmy says, if we sent someone to speak to Miller, I doubt they'd have made it back. Well, we can ask Matt about this. Let's check in with the chat. Okay, Macon says, it seemed a waste when any chemist in London could identify opium poppies for us. It seemed a waste of time to visit Charles Miller. Perry says, love it. A share in the carriage company soon to become Yellow Cab. Okay, so that was a pretty fantastic ending. I mean, if you look at these endings, it's hard to do these endings right, but we always want a sort of satisfying narrative, and this was really exactly what you would sort of want. We've got these different emotional tones from each of these, and the police report where we recovered Harrington and busted it wide open, and then the slightly aloof, self-righteous Sherlock Holmes congratulating us, but also pointing out that he solved some things we didn't. He filled us in on a couple of the clues that we missed about the blood on the pill. I think someone pointed that out at some point, but he was a little more precise about it. And then his little comment at the end about hopefully they'll get rid of opium and people should use cocaine. And then the really sweet ending here by the wife who thanked us, told us that she understood her husband, appreciated it, and then offering us a share in this new cab company. I mean, really, really sweet, really satisfying. Okay, let's see here. The forgiving letter from the wife is very Conan Doyle, says Macon. Debbie says, I assume the firm as a whole would own the share and any dividends distributed to us. Debbie and Rob are all talking about how are they going to get income from this share that Reichler and Associates have been provided. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. Let me just make sure everyone's on the same page. You and I are going to talk a little bit here about this case, what we thought, and Matt is hopefully watching the replies. So if you have questions for Matt, you can say them now, you can get them out. And then after we finish talking a little bit, giving our thoughts, we'll take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, Matt will be on the line on the stream with me and we can hear from him his thoughts. I want to go over, I have got a bunch of questions for Matt. But a couple of things for the audience to think about while we talk about it is maybe like, what were your favorite parts? What were there parts we didn't understand? Parts you think could have been done better? Questions you have for Matt? So let's just check in with the chat. Mark Poole said the whole thing held together well throughout the 5 sessions. I think that the ending really wrapped things up nicely, and it was fun to see that we were right about most of the big picture issues. We missed a chunk with the Charles Miller being center to it, and he owns some of the properties. It sounds like that was an angle that we could have investigated and found out about. had we pursued it. Let's just see where the Charles Miller part came up. So we asked about the first thing. On our first letter, we said, go to the forest, see if you could figure out where this flower got left. And then the reply we got back said, hey, you know, you're working up quite a bill. By letter 2, we had figured out that it was about opium. And let's see what we suggested here. Okay, yeah. Okay, so here's what we suggested regarding Charles Miller. So the florist said, hey, there's a guy out in the outskirts of London who might know more about poppies. And we had already gotten the letter chastising us for running up expenses that were going to be deducted from our fees. So here's what we asked Wiggins. If you happen to be in the area, might you pay a visit to florist farmer Charles Miller to gather some general information about the cultivation of opium poppies and any thoughts on whether their sale might be of interest to a criminal operation and whether he has heard of anyone trying to grow poppies locally? We were going to ask Wiggins to ask him basically the entire what he's actually doing. But then we said, but only if doing so can be done cheaply. Otherwise, just stop by Lomax, get a drawing of a poppy, and we'll confirm with Miss Harrington if that's what it was. And so that's what happened. The expense was too high to pay for a trip out to the country. Had we not been concerned with cost, we might have broken this case wide open, or Wiggins would not have come back alive, which would have been very terrible. That's pretty cool that was the key thing. Now, I'm very curious to hear from Rob if that was already planned out from the beginning, or did he take advantage of the opportunity of this framework to say, hey, that's a clever idea, let me write this in. I'm dying to hear the answer to that. Perry says, great effort by Matt and team that worked on this. Rob says, we need some venture capital to fund our investigations. We nearly got him killed again, sending him to the pickled egg. It was funny, not funny. It was cool to hear how Sherlock Holmes was like, all of our inquiries, especially when we went to the pickled egg, like that's what got Percival Thorne killed, when we started inquiring about things at the pickled egg. Everything felt like it really made sense and wrapped up well to me. If people have other loose ends that I'm forgetting to talk about, maybe you could remind me here. I've got my list of my favorite parts. Let me just go through this, and then I was going to talk about them when I was talking to Matt, but maybe it's best if we talk about them now, and then we can concentrate on Matt's thought. So I love the psychological elements that we encountered throughout, right? There was this whole, even right from the start, there was this question of Peter Harrington's behavior being odd. He wouldn't look at his wife. And that led us to certain conclusions, and he was spending time with his son. And I love these kinds of cases where there is a psychological element. And we talked quite a bit about what that suggested. And I think it did suggest right from the start that he had invested the money and lost it and was ashamed to look his wife in the face. That was really nice. And then the puzzle of the flowers being delivered, what were they, and uncovering that they were poppies and how that relates. And then the nagging problem we had with what did the flowers left on the doorstep mean. We eventually came, I think, to the right conclusion that it was basically a threat that they could get to his family. But that was a nice piece of evidence that we kept returning to. I loved that the second letter admonished us about the cost. That was a very fun moment, because one of the things, we've just invented this system where we sent these free-form replies to Matt. And one of the issues was, what are the limitations? Should we only get to go to 3 leads? Should we get to send each person to one place? And we eventually decided in the beginning, we're just going to treat this like we would a regular letter. We could ask them to do 100 things, but they're probably going to reply and say they don't have time for it or whatever. And so I think Matt handled that really adeptly. in that the reply basically said, certain things I couldn't do, and the rest of them, hey, it's your money, guys, but it's going to come out of your end. And then we took that seriously and tried to not go overboard. That was really fun. I liked the fun. There was some humor throughout this that was really well done. First of all, the writing was fantastic. Everything felt very period appropriate, and the documents felt very real. It was great to have such a variety of fonts and writing and official documents. We got a death certificate. We got the police reports. I know Rob has helped a lot with that, helped Matt a lot about that, and Debbie has helped tweak up the writing and tone of stuff. I mean, this is Matt's baby and Matt's project, and he's done, I think, an amazing job, especially just to come out of nowhere with no preparation. Matt just said, hey, that sounds like an interesting idea, and the next week we had our first letter. But having those extra little details that Rob worked on really does help to make it feel real. So the little bits of humor where we met Sherlock Holmes in the bar, and we knew, like, it was subtle, but we knew that was Sherlock Holmes in disguise. And then it was fun how we mentioned in our letter about this idea of the tulip investment, and Lomax went off on a side tangent about the tulips and wanted to talk to us more about it. That was fun. I loved my brilliant idea to check the cab logs to look for common hubs of source and destination. I love the little element of Percival's body being staged. That was really cool. So I had a lot of moments that I really liked here. I've got a couple of notes about things we had trouble with, but let me check back in with the chat. I want to hear what you guys thought about the case. Perry says, I think we struggled more with Peter's possible guilt than anything else. Yeah. Debbie says, it was brought up that Peter may have gotten involved unwittingly, but that was missed out of the final letter. I think the final letter told us that he didn't initially know, but then found out. That's how I kind of read it. Debbie says, a lot of my job was translating modern American into Victorian English. Matt did a pretty good job, though. Emmy says, I can definitely see why the play-by-mail cases like the Blinded Birder limited you to 3 characters to send to one location each letter. Sometimes it felt like we had too many ideas. Limitations forced you to prioritize. Yes, yes. Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously, you can't scale this project. This was a bespoke mystery created with Matt listening to taking our replies and working with them. And we're going to hear from Matt more about that. But, I mean, really, this was an extraordinary experience. The idea that this went from idea to implementation and was so well done. I feel like we got spoiled here by how wonderfully done this was. This feels like a professionally made case that was worked on for a long period of time. I do think Matt should contact Dear Holmes, see if they want to do this, maybe in an extra long format with all these documents. It's a bigger case than Dear Holmes normally does. So let's look at some of the things that I note we had trouble with. One of the things right from the start that we had a little bit of trouble with was understanding the flowers that were left, how they were a threat. We went back and forth with that a lot. Like, we wrote it out in our replies. We said either it's a threat from someone reminding him that they're involved in opium traffic, a threat to his family. We thought at one point, is it possible that he's being threatened like by someone saying, here, the opium, because I know you're involved in opium, so blackmail thing. It was a little odd. Like, it was a little odd of a threat. If you think about it logically, it feels like it would make more sense for the dealer to tell him when he drops off the delivery, if he says, I want to quit, for the dealer telling him, hey, I could kill your family if you try to quit. It's just weird to deliver the opium flowers to his house. That was a little odd. And we had a little bit of hard time in the end. We came to the right conclusion, but it felt like a little weird of a thing. And then there was I think we struggled a little bit with what to do at the end regarding finding Harrington. Now, it may have been that Matt intended us to take an extra turn, at which point we would find Harrington. But it was a little odd in terms of finding him at the end and then finding him at the beginning. We did try to tail his cab. We didn't have much luck. It wasn't clear whether we were ever meant to actually find his house, his hiding spot. And in the end, we were basically just told the police, hey, you're going to have to go to these different spots and hopefully you'll find him. And then the note in Abernathy's office with an address, we were right to, from a game standpoint, to feel like, okay, 58 Euston, that's probably an address. There's a good chance he's there. Even if we don't know exactly what that address is. Turns out we guessed correctly. It is a new opium den, and it does make sense that he might be held there. But we had a little bit of trouble. We knew that it was probably a good address based on the gaminess of it, but not sort of logically why Abernathy had the address where Peter Harrington was, although I think it was explained fairly well. But in general, obviously one of the tricky things with a case like this is we had no rules for knowing when it should end and how much we were supposed to have figured out. And it'll be interesting hearing from Matt about some of these things. Like if we had not chosen to go to Abernathy's office, as I thought we shouldn't, the channel was adamant that we visit Abernathy, and it seems important that we did, because that's how, and not only did we uncover a piece of it, but we uncovered the location of Harrington. And it's interesting to think, what would Matt have done if we hadn't? I mean, part of Matt's job was to make it so we could mostly solve it. So Matt would have had to come up with some other way of letting us mostly solve this case and finding Harrington. Let's see. Macon says, I was so impressed by the feel of it. None of the real Dear Holmes cases felt like the kind of case Holmes traditionally got involved with, and this one does in spades. I think we were divided, and then Macon says, I think we were divided as a group about whether they were a threat, but the pro threats were convinced, yes. Debbie says, it's a wonderful blend of Dear Holmes and Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, with even some characters from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective like Lomax. I mean, it really did feel genuine. And I think Macon's comment is really worth repeating, that the Dear Holmes cases are good. They are compelling. I am enjoying them. But this one really fleshed out everything, especially with the wrap-up where we finally got this long discussion from Holmes and we had these interactions with Isabel Harrington. It really did feel like a complete story, and even had a reason Sherlock Holmes was involved in this case himself. Very cool. Emmy says, I'm interested to hear how much changed, how close we came to complete disaster. Any other questions from the chat that you want to pass on to Matt? I haven't seen Matt in the chat, but I'm hoping he's still with us and watching and listening. I mean, I loved it. You obviously couldn't scale this up. In case people are joining that aren't familiar with the channel, this is a little shoestring channel. Matt did not get paid for this. He just neither did Rob or Debbie. Debbie completely just volunteered to do this. It's been a real joy. One of the highlights of this channel in the last 3 years has been this experience. I mean, I love the play-by-mail games in general, but this idea that we've played this custom written case that was written each week as we went along, really very special. I hope you've found it to be a special experience too. You've been part of something quite unique here, and maybe we'll see more of these. Very professionally done. Yeah, I don't know how it could have possibly been done in a more polished, professional manner. It's just shocking. It's actually shocking, the quality of this case and how much enjoyment. I mean, last week we spent 2 hours just talking and discussing this, and it is fun to get to write a full letter in the theme and atmosphere writing a letter to Watson. It felt like we were interacting with Watson. In fact, that might be. I have a list of criticisms, of suggestions. That's a very short list. One of them was just not being sure about about when to wrap up. I think it was very clever for Matt to write in that last letter by Watson summarizing what he didn't know. Maybe from a emotional standpoint, like getting this final letter from Isabel Harrington was fantastic. Tiny little suggestion might be that we've been talking to Watson for 4 letters, and it's a tiny tinge of, I wish we had wrapped up our relationship with Watson. Like, it's a little sad that we don't, since he's the person that has been our contact for all of these letters, we've been sort of partnering with Watson. And it would have been nice to have like a little buddy wrap up of Watson. Maybe Watson will write us a letter after, postscript letter after the fact, giving us a little epilogue. Maybe Watson is taking a well-deserved rest. Debbie says it's the kind of experience you could only get with a group of friends, like a tabletop RPG session. You couldn't do it commercially. Yes, you couldn't do it commercially. Although there's lots of interesting theories about mechanics for play-by-mail games. Rob and I talk about them on the Discord occasionally, and they're going to come up in our future game design discussions. So we'll return to that issue. Emmy says he's too busy detoxing all the opium addicts we found. Good point. He's probably got his hands full there. All right, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to break for 5 minutes. Maybe we better do an 8-minute break. We're going to break for 8 minutes. During that time, if you've got questions for Matt, type them in the chat. And then in that 8 minutes, Matt and I are going to set up the Zoom call, get all the hardware stuff configured. And when we come back from the break, we're not done. When we come back for the break, you'll be writing any comments you have for Matt. Matt will join us for a little chat, and he'll fill us in on some of these things we've been wondering about. All right, so I'll see you in 8 minutes. Don't go away. We're not done. 8 minutes. We'll be back with MattC. All right, we're back. You're watching Co-op for Two. I've got Matt connected, hopefully. Let's see if it works. All right, Matt, can you hear me?
Yes.
And can the audience hear Matt? That's the question. Let me just check in with the audience. Let's see. So I've got a couple. This is the first time we're doing this. Kind of exciting for me. The audience says they can hear Matt. Okay, so everything's working well. First of all, Matt, thank you for creating this for us. It was really quite a special experience. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I've got a bunch of questions for you. But first, why don't you tell us about yourself, however much you want to convey?
Sure, yeah, and I want to thank you and the channel as well. This is just a really fun opportunity to write something that would be enjoyed by people, and don't get to do that a lot, so appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm an engineer, but I do have some creative interests. I used to write a lot when I was younger, but I haven't really done it creatively in years. Mostly just I've taken some college classes in writing, but just something kind of lost interest in. But I actually ended up getting more into like comedy improv and
Oh,
public
really?
speaking things. Yeah, so the improv nature of this felt like home to me, and it was really fun. So I ended up liking it a lot, and kind of reignited that little flame. So I really enjoyed it. Um, I actually was watching your video, the Sherlock Holmes fan cases, like a couple months ago,
Uh-huh.
and I was looking into that. I realized there were so many of those out there, and it just felt like I should try to write one. And the timing kind of worked out because you brought up the idea about someone writing one of these like right around the same time I was about to start writing one. So it felt like a good opportunity to do it. Um, yeah, I actually thought when you asked me, I was like, oh yeah, give me a couple months, and maybe I'll
Yeah.
write ahead of time, maybe January or February or something. But I just like went home that night and just came up with everything. It all just like kind of like flowed, and I wrote it so fast. I was just like maybe confident that I could do the whole thing. So it was really easy.
What what did you have written? What did you have formulated when we started? Was it all done? Did you have the whole thing planned out? Did it go according to
No,
plan?
no. I basically had the mystery. There was two layers to it. There was the scam, and then there was the opium smuggling, and those never really changed. But like everything else, kind of did. I knew who kind of the players were that were involved, but I didn't really quite know kind of how they fit yet. I had an idea of how it was going to go, but it kind of went in a different direction a little bit. But I mean, I kind of like just stuck to the idea of like that core mystery, and that didn't really change. I think that didn't change too much, but there were a lot of details that did change. There was a lot of stuff that I kind of had to adjust as I went. I mean,
Hmm.
I'll get into that too, but like the biggest thing I can think of is like I actually did not know that opium was legal in the 19th
That was
century.
gonna that was
I
gonna
didn't.
be one of my questions.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But it didn't matter. That's the great thing about this is I could just kind of just make up a reason why, people were trying to smuggle it. So it just ended up doing that instead. Um, so I didn't want people to feel like though that they had to, oh, maybe Matt thinks that opium's illegal, so we should go this way instead. But it was fine that you all decided to go the way you did because it just kind of rewarded that a little bit.
Well, that was one of the ideas that hopefully, if you were willing to listen to our thoughts and plans, you could use them either to counter our theories or use our theories to bounce off. So that was a fun moment. I wondered, like, well, I think we all wondered, like, this is a weird situation with opium not being illegal, but as you worked around it, we worked around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
wrote like a whole bunch of things that are changed and stuff, but I can get into that whenever you want. But
I do want to get to those. Can you tell us, I guess maybe a good question that I have is what was the workflow with you, Rob, and Debbie? Because that was an interesting, I mean, it's amazing that you guys just all came
yeah,
together and made it work with no, as you said, there was no gap. There was the idea that I just thought maybe this would be an interesting idea. And then the next week we had our first case.
they were a huge part of this. Like they basically filled in my weaknesses for me because I don't like to do anything like graphic or visual. It's not something I'm really. I don't. Maybe I would if I did more of it, but I just don't have any experience with that, and just kind of felt uncomfortable with it. But Rob did pretty much everything with the letterheads and the visuals. That was all him. Debbie was really helpful because I'm from America. I don't I don't necessarily spend a lot of time reading about Victorian England, except that I play a lot of Sherlock Holmes cases. I play Sherlock Holmes consulting detectives, so I kind of had a feel for the characters, but had a little bit of trouble kind of some of the language, but kind of was fun to learn as I went about some of the choice of language. Eventually, we actually had the autocorrect set to like, British English
Oh,
on on the Word doc. So
can can you set autocorrect to 1800s British
yeah,
English?
the
No,
spell
you have
check,
to do
yeah.
that part.
So
Uh,
obviously the color with a U, but like things like that. But I was able to figure that out as I went a little bit. There was a big discussion too about Wiggins. I just really didn't know how to write him, and I think Debbie helped a lot with shaping his character and with kind of she rewrote a lot of his first letter and kind of how he sounded. So I thought that was really helpful. Yeah.
I mean, it sounded perfect, and everyone had a distinct voice, especially the end with Isabel. I mean, everyone felt right. Everyone felt very of the period and with their own personalities.
Yeah.
It was really lovely.
Yeah, we had a Discord that we were using the chat, and we talked between the letters. Usually, I would post a letter and get some feedback from Debbie and Rob, and maybe make some adjustments after that. But that was kind of our flow there. Had a lot of fun talking to them too in the chat. That was a good couple months there.
Let's see if there's a question in the chat before we go back to some of my questions. Let's see. Let's see. Can you see some? You can't see them on the screen. I'll read them too. Okay, let's start with this one here. Emmy said, "What is the biggest clue you put in that we either ignored or misinterpreted?"
Oh
I
yeah,
felt like
that's an easy one.
he said. He says, "I felt like the first letter wanted us to analyze the cab bookings, but we weren't sure what to look for until near the end." Okay, so you ready? You have an answer for that?
Yeah, that's
What's the
exactly
biggest
right. It
clue?
was the cab logs. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
put it in there thinking you guys were just gonna go straight for the cab logs, start making grids and spreadsheets of all the locations. We did not go in that direction at all. But I basically was I was surprised by the first choice. You ended up going with sort of what ended up being a red herring, but what really mattered was the time after he started acting differently. And you got a ride from before then, but I couldn't really put anything in there because he wasn't involved in the conspiracy yet. So and it wasn't really revisited until the last letter when clearly I made it very clear the cab operation was like totally involved in all of it. But that's okay though, because it went a different direction. That was kind of the whole nature of this, and ended up finding other ways to get you there. But that was probably one of the hardest parts. Was I was trying to figure out like how to get you where I needed you, and I ended up abandoning the idea of getting you to the opium dens by the end. I figured that maybe there's another way I could show you the solution, or maybe not focus as much on the conspiracy and just make it more about Harrington.
Well, it's very clever to have Holmes involved because
Mm.
then when he explained the parts we missed, it made sense that he was also in parallel working on some of this.
Right. That was a response. That was kind of a response to that too. I wanted him to be kind of covering the areas that you weren't going after. Like obviously there's a huge opium conspiracy and he's going to be thinking about that and involved in it. So it just made sense to have him like planted in somewhere. Like I was doing a scene with a seedy tavern. I was like, it's a perfect place to drop Sherlock Holmes hiding in a beard or whatever and just pretending to drink at the bar while he's learning about the case. But I didn't quite work out exactly what Sherlock Holmes was going to do until toward the end. But I kind of knew his parallel case was some sort of like thing for Mycroft, where he was someone important politician got dragged into drugs, and he was going to try to sort it out. So, yeah.
Uh, and then another question from Perry, basically same question. How much was pre-planned? How much was on the fly? We've been talking about that a little. You could fill in that if you want more. Here's a question more specifically from Debbie. She says, would you have considered an unhappy ending if we really screwed up? Or would Holmes have swooped in to save the day where we failed? How much did you consider whether you should punish us? Like, to me, this felt the best because Holmes sort of chided us about the things we missed, but we were sort of given the pat on the back for doing a good
Yeah.
enough job. I felt like it was kind of your job to make us feel good about it, and you were going to save us from having it end too badly.
I don't want to say there wasn't any danger, but there was always consequences if you made choices that were not going to be helpful. And but I wanted the consequences to be kind of playful and
Yeah.
just kind of silly, but nothing that would. I still wanted you to obviously finish the case with a closure, having an ending and feeling like you did something. But obviously you could have saved Peter from spending a few days in jail, or maybe you would have
Yeah,
gotten a
I
few
like that.
company if you'd figured out that he
Uh,
was that he wasn't guilty. But it didn't really matter though. I just kind of was about the journey and just getting you to the end. But I did want there to be some consequences, and that was part of the mechanic too. Is I know we were talking about like the fact that there was no time limit discussed or anything, but I wasn't really worried about that because I figured I could always just make thematic time limits. I can create some sort of like danger that's slowly encroaching on the group, that the longer you take, the more these bad guys are going to figure out what's going on and start grabbing people and murdering people. So, if you'd gone a couple more weeks, maybe somebody would have ended up dead or something bad would have
Uh-huh.
happened. But it was never really that bad. I was actually expecting maybe to go one more week, but I think it made sense to end it. Ended up agreeing with you that the tone felt right to kind of end it at that point. So
Yeah, that
yeah.
was it. It was really interesting, the issue of when it should end and how it should end. And I think we were on the same wavelength in that when we got that final letter, I kind of felt like you were giving us the option to have another letter. Like you were willing to have another letter. I felt like that's what it was. But we had such a sort of finale feeling to that last letter with that. We had a 2-hour discussion. We were really chewing on it. And then the maps, it just felt like we were right at the crest that it would be a good way. And it made sense to sort of say Harrington's in danger. Like in real life, you wouldn't mess around. So it felt like it all came together, that it was the right time to go for the ending.
Yeah, in last week's letter, all the leads that were chosen were things I really wanted to explore, and I wasn't sure if there'd be another chance to. So I really wanted to do everything in that letter. So, Abernathy, Thorne's house, getting the cab log map. Those were all things that I wanted to make sure were added in before the end. So I kind of crammed a lot into that week. Maybe it could have been spread over 2 weeks, but I thought maybe if you took another week, it would just be to kind of verify a couple things, find Peter, and maybe talk out the solution and like present an official solution. But you kind of did that in the last stream, so I figured we had enough. There were a couple of leaps I had to make at the end. You commented on them during the video, but like, yeah, it didn't really make sense that Peter was at Euston Street. He was actually originally at the warehouse, but the way it was written, it sounded like you didn't want to go raid the warehouse until Peter was safe, and there was
Uh-huh.
some uncertainty there, and I didn't want to like make you wait another week just for that. So I figured I'd find some way to shortcut the ending and just kind of put him there and have an explanation for why he was there. But yeah, the truth is, if there was a note in Abernathy's office and the guy just walked out, you wouldn't have gotten a note yet. So I just made up that he was handed another note at the same time. So thing like that. So, things like
What
that
would have
happen sometimes. Yeah.
what would have happened if we never went to Abernathy's office? What how were like
Well,
have
here's
you
the thing.
thought about some of the things
He
that we
wasn't
didn't
involved at
do?
the beginning. That was a change.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't originally involved. I
Okay.
actually changed that. I felt like originally you guys were going to find one of the opium dens and sort of connect that the flowers are being moved back and forth. But since we never really got there, I kind of wanted to connect the cab company to your investigation. So it felt right to kind of have Abernathy, but it would have been too cliche to have be like, the guy who owns the company is taking bribes, and so I
Uh-huh.
just thought maybe making him like a victim and being used by everybody made a lot of sense. But yeah, he wasn't part of the thing at the beginning. A lot of people were. If actually you were talking about Charles Miller, I totally winged that at the end. I had a whole other person in my character in mind for who was going to be the part behind this, but you never really reached him. So I just kind of took an existing character and made him the one behind it. But that was the point. It didn't really matter. Sherlock was off doing that, and you guys were trying to save Peter. So that was kind of the
Well,
idea there.
that was actually a brilliant moment, I think. I mean, one of the interesting things about doing this and having the opportunity to discuss this with you, and thank you for being willing to do that, is to think about what lessons are there to be learned. And in terms of sort of crafting a satisfying story, it may seem ironic, but one of the really nice, sweet, clever elements here is that you picked the person that we didn't pursue, but that we thought about pursuing, and you gave him a bigger role, and that felt somehow satisfying. That like we could have visited Charles Miller, but we didn't, and then we get chided by Holmes for not following up. That was really quite fun.
Yeah, I guess the chat's it's the punishment for not figuring out that he was not guilty at the end.
Uh huh.
But yeah, it was fun. I mean, I really liked sprinkling some of the Easter eggs and jokes throughout the thing. I liked kind of making fun of the channel a little bit and some of the
Uh huh.
replies.
Well,
But
I love
had a lot of
how
fun with it.
yeah. I mean, we had this whole discussion in the first case about the tulips, and
Yeah.
then and then have Lomax just wax on for a page and a half about the tulips. He's like, "Come by, I want to talk to you more about the tulips," and that was pretty
I mean, I
funny.
didn't want to write a whole extra letter, but like it was really easy. All I did is I went to Chat GPT and I just said like, "Tell me about tulips," and just
Uh-huh.
pasted in whatever it said as the encyclopedia entry. So that ended up being kind of a little joke there, but it sort of just plays into the idea about like the sort of how much should you include in the reply, and that was interesting too to see that develop. I didn't really know what the first reply was going to look like, and it was really long. Like I wasn't expecting it to be so long, and but I really I sort of handled that. I know you're saying like the cost and the money was the thing. That was actually a joke. I sort of just added that in because the chat
Uh-huh.
was talking about getting paid, and I wanted to sort of tease that a little bit. Like, well, you're not going to get paid now if you don't do
Uh-huh.
this. But actually, I sort of saw it as like a to-do list. Like they had things that you said these are priorities, and there were things that were lower. But it's not like once they did the priorities, they would just wait and not do anything. I figured they'll just move on to the next thing unless you write a letter saying please change to this. So
Mm-hmm.
they always had a list of things. They just like Miller, for example, they would have gone to Miller if you had not gone to Whip, but there wasn't time to do both. So I didn't want to write like 6 letters for that one. So I just had him go to Whip because that was the first one, and I just said he just quickly went to Lomax just to kind of close out that little side thing there. Yeah,
Well, that I mean, that actually turned out to really work well. The idea that we wrote you whatever we wanted, but there was limited amount of time. You interpreted that as saying, "Well, we only have time to do certain things, so whatever your top priorities are." And you say the cost was a joke. We got that, but we also sort of embraced it as like,
yeah.
okay, here's something to help constrain us from coming up with a million things to do, and it was kind of fun. And I took it seriously throughout the whole
Yeah.
case. Like, I can't. We don't have unlimited funds. This is a real case.
No, it was a joke, but I went with it because I knew that you all cared about the cost and you were talking about it. So it seemed like a fun way to get you sort of invested in what was happening. Like it's like, oh, well, your payment's going to get cut now, and having that be in the last letter, like, oh, finally you're going to find out your payment. It's kind of a fun little way to make it interactive. I guess was trying to do.
Whose idea was it to give us a share of the company and wrap it up? To me, like those are
Yeah,
small details, but that really just felt like. And normally I would think that would be something that, like, if you were writing the novel, that would take you months to finally get to this end clever little wrap up that's emotionally satisfying. But to me, that's like a subtle little detail that really put the ribbon on the end of this case. How he's making a new cab company with Whitcomb, and here's a share. I mean, very sweet.
yeah. I came up with that over the weekend, and I just it all just felt like perfect, and I felt like kind of lucky. It was like everything just fell into place here. I mean, the cab company fell apart. We've got 2 cab drivers that are pretty smart, and they want to get paid. But as I was writing, I was thinking like, oh, this is fun. Let's talk about how much they get paid. Like, but I didn't want to like do a dollar amount or something. It seemed kind of silly to do that, but it just made sense to give you guys a share, one little measly share of the cab
Very
company
sweet.
to
Oh, it's
hopefully will
200
balloon it like
years
someone said.
later.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody said in the chat it's gonna be yellow cab in the future. So there you go. You've got the foot in the door on that.
Let's see. Okay. Emmy says, was it stressful hearing us throw out theories that were either way off your plan or too close to the answer too soon?
No, not really. I mean, I could just go wherever I wanted with it. I mean, I was a little worried in the first letter. My biggest fear when I started was that you guys would figure it out immediately, like in the first letter. My sort of safeguard to that was I created 2 layers of mystery. I had the scam and then the opium stuff. So I didn't really think you would figure both out in the first letter, even though you guys are pretty experienced with these. But I felt like you'd probably go after the scam first. I sort of dangled Thorn, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe have him go after him. So at least we'd last 2 letters or something. So before it
Uh-huh.
all gets through. But if you figured it out in the second or third letter, I would have rolled with it. I would have said congratulations, you did it. And it was no defined length. It didn't have to be 6 letters or 5 letters
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. So it could be whatever it wants. I mean, it's fun. It's sort of like an improv thing. Like sometimes people think you can't walk out of a scene or provide closure or do something because that would end the scene. But it's actually kind of fun to do that and force somebody to think of a way to kind of keep it going. So I wasn't really afraid of you guys just figuring things out too early. I did feel kind of regretful about the thing with Harrington trying to track him, getting his cab. It
Oh,
wasn't
yeah, I
about trying to
discussed
stop
that.
you. Yeah, I wasn't
Uh-huh.
trying to stop you from reaching him. I think, although it would have given you a huge shortcut, but I think I was starting to write the scene with Watson finding Harrington. I couldn't figure out how he was going to find him. Like I was thinking, like, does he go to somewhere where he doesn't know where he drives to? And I sort of thought about how he didn't check the cab logs, and I was like, they probably should have checked the cab logs. Maybe I'm just going to have him like wander around. I actually thought about flipping a coin. I was going to flip a coin and have it be like yes or no to see if you found him. But
Okay.
I thought about like Harrington's taking a lot of his Rutherford's taking a lot of his rides, and it made more sense that you would bump into him instead. Um, Went with that instead. But then later, I felt like he got discouraged to go after looking for him again, which I was kind of sad about. That I ended up sort of leading in that direction. But it was a good call to get in the cab with him and follow him. We just didn't really have a plan to do it, so I couldn't really get him in there.
I think it was good that we didn't talk to Harrington directly. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a tricky situation. I mean, he knows the details of what he's doing, so it's tricky to have him not talk about that. So I thought all the things where we heard him talking, he just didn't want to talk about it to
Mhm.
people. It made
Yeah, I mean, on
sense.
the one hand, he wouldn't have said anything because he's afraid to say anything. But he did have a clever idea though about like trying to just like talk to him about stuff and not getting. And I felt like, oh, that should work. But the thing is, this all leads into like a whole deleted side plot I had that I deleted right at the beginning. It was a whole thing I was going to do, and the second letter. I was planning if you followed Peter, I was planning to have whoever followed him get kidnapped. And like but I actually wrote the whole letter out, and I didn't like it. It ended up being like too much of like a whole new mystery. You're trying to find Wiggins instead of solving the case, and it didn't work. So it kind of shifted where I thought it would go a little bit, and so I sort of had to let you try to find Peter then. But then I was like, well, just couldn't figure out how it would work. But I guess if you found him, he would have probably just been a little close-lipped on it, but tight-lipped on it. But you could have followed his route or whatever. But it's fine. I mean, we still would have gone a few letters, so I wasn't too afraid of you figuring it out too soon.
Harry says, "What was the hardest thing you had to deal with?"
Um, the the whip letter was pretty hard. The pickled egg letter. Writing for that character was pretty tricky. I had to sort of develop that character and think about how he's going to sound. And I was already kind of struggling a bit with making the era sound authentic. So I just had a little trouble with that. It took a little longer than the others, but not too bad at the end. I was pretty happy with how it came out, but it was kind of a slog to get through that one.
The
I think,
scene at the pickled egg.
yeah,
That
right.
felt right to me. I didn't.
Yeah, it
Nothing
worked out. I think
sounded awkward about it.
it just
And
took a little while.
the scene with Holmes. Were you surprised that we knew right away it was
I
Holmes?
actually was. I mean, I knew you were going to figure it out, but like as soon as you read the line, you're like, "That's Holmes." Like,
Yeah,
I kind of thought later when he beat them up, you would figure it out then. But as soon as you saw a guy with a beard, you just knew it was. Just knew it was,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was too obvious, but that's fine. It didn't change anything. It was just kind of a fun Easter egg to have him in the bar. I wasn't sure if I was going to have him very involved, but I just kind of wanted him to be in somewhere in that scene. It just seemed fun to have him there, and yeah.
Another thing that I really liked that I didn't mention was talking about some of my favorite parts. Another thing that I really liked is you sort of tied up the loose ends in very satisfying ways. In addition to the final letter, like finding the that whole scene where we get into Percival Thorne's house, and the combination of the staging the body was very fun, but also just the fraud letter felt very like a Victorian fraud thing, and it was really fun to watch him. Like he crossed out one word, he was trying to make it sound like it was very well done and very satisfying.
That was so much fun to write that letter. I had a blast with it. I mean, I just kind of thought of it as I was like going ruffling. I was like, I wanted you to find something in his apartment that would be helpful or his house, and that's sort of what I ended up with going with. But if you caught it, the all of the things he invests in are all the resources from Settlers of Catan,
Yeah,
the
we
brick.
saw some of that. I just liked his use. He was like broadification. He was coming up with
Yeah,
his own terms for some of the scammy things. Pretty nice.
yeah. But that whole point of that, as you figured out, was to establish that there was no scam, that
Correct.
there was no investment,
There
that
was
they got
no
wasn't
Uncle
a flower
Robert. There was
investment.
no real investment. Yeah, we
Yeah,
did get that.
yeah.
All right, let me see if my list. Is there anything? Do you have any? Do you have stuff you want to make sure I don't miss? I mean, I've got a couple other
Yeah.
questions.
I
Yeah,
mean, one thing I thought was really important for this format was like, and I was talking about like Debbie and Rob about this in the Discord too, like about how to end it, when to end it. But I felt like I wanted you guys to have like one major breakthrough at least per week, like you would figure something out. And if you didn't figure
Mm-hmm.
something out and you were starting, or you figured most of the things out, it wouldn't make sense to continue it anymore. So that was kind of how I respond to questions about like, should this end soon? Or like, well, I think that there's something major they could figure out in the next letter. And I think in pretty much every letter you did figure something major out. There was one maybe you didn't, but I ended up the next week kind of spoon feeding it, so to kind of catch up a little bit. But yeah, I think the pacing was important, and just like I wouldn't have let it go on forever. I know it was kind of tight-lipped about like how long it would be, but I was never planning for it to be more than like 6 or 7 weeks. But I didn't think it would go that long. But I would have gone more if it made sense to. But it just felt right, kind of like it was reaching the climax of the story, and sort of made sense. There was only so many things to figure out, so you had to sort of get all of them resolved.
I mean, this is touching on, for me, if I think about the sort of the game design issues involved in this issue of pacing and when to end, it does really feel like a tough nut to crack in this format. If you're playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you basically go through all the leads you can find, and if you hit a period where you're getting nothing new, then you start to slowly say, okay, I think we're at the end. But if it's a play by mail, you can't let the players spend a month getting blank replies.
Right.
That's just not feasible. So you're in a tough position, like you said, of wanting to give with each letter something satisfying that they figured out. And that's got to be tricky, because if we don't come up with good things to do, then you have to find a way to give us something, even though we haven't earned it.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be huge, but like, for example, like the ride, you end up running into John Rutherford. Like it wasn't quite what you wanted, but you got a clue, and ended up being an important clue. But it was, it felt like a consolation, but it was supposed to be helpful. And that was more just because I couldn't logistically figure out how to get you there. But I think, yeah, I could have gone. You could have just said in the first letter, like, let's just spend all the time in the library. Let's look at the tulips. Let's not do anything
Mm-hmm.
else. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe I think that happened. Something would have happened. There would have been a consequence, or someone would have been captured or murdered or something, and then you would have had to realize, and they would have left something behind. There's always a way to get you back, like kind of dangle the carrot and be like, over here, something going on over
Uh-huh.
here. So, I mean, you can always guide or lead things the way you want if you're writing this. So, I mean, there's no real reason for anyone doing this to be too afraid to like, oh, what if they don't figure it out? Like you can kind of get people where they need to be. It's sort of like, I guess it's like being a DM for doing Dungeons and Dragons or something. Like you just have to
Sure.
sort of get it where it needs
I
to be.
do think, you've mentioned something about the decision you made. You said if we had followed Harrington, maybe the person who followed them would have been kidnapped. You thought about it, but you decided not to. I think it it may pay to reinforce that I think you made an important decision there, because um it was very satisfying that events did happen. Like Percival Thorne did get killed. That was great. I think if one of our people had been kidnapped, you would very much risk changing it from a sort of investigation where we're investigating all these details that we're trying to figure out, to more of like an action game. And
Yeah.
and I don't think you want to do that. And I think that was the right decision.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I realized when I was reading that letter I wrote. I was like, this isn't going to work. This is exactly what you said. Like, this is going to they're not going to they're going to be too focused. Lestrade's going to come in. Everyone's going to search everywhere for this person. And like, it just didn't make sense. Like originally when I was brainstorming, I thought, oh, Lestrade's just going to be like, he'll figure it out. You don't have evidence, you got to figure it out on your own, but
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't make sense. Um, yeah. And then actually at the end, there was something else. Oh yeah, that did happen though in the fourth letter. I mean, you ended up getting sort of a big climactic, like someone's missing, someone was murdered, all this stuff's happening. But it was toward the end, so I think it made sense then. But
Yes, exactly.
I did risk kind of like that same thing happening there. But there had to be a consequence, I think, because there was a big. I presented a moral dilemma in the third letter about Peter. Like, because one of the theories in the letter was like,
Oh, that
we
was
think he might
great.
be in danger. Like, what if people are like threatening him? And I'm like, well, if you think that, maybe you should like call the police or do something about that. So I had Watson suggest that to see if maybe you'd want to like warn him. But since you decided not to go to Lestrade or tell them about Peter, even though that might have been the right call, I still thought there should be a consequence to that. So that's why he was kidnapped. He wouldn't have been kidnapped if you actually told him. He would have been taken to Scotland Yard, and you would have had a chance to interview him. instead.
Oh,
But
that's
you also could have
interesting.
been too talkative. But if you figured out that he was being threatened, you could have probably got him to talk.
So that's interesting. So now clarify something. He knew he did know that he was transporting opium at the end, but
Uh,
kept doing
he
it.
he kept doing it because his family was threatened.
Sure.
They were
Okay.
threatened that he was harm his family. But I mean, I think you made a good point in the stream about how like it was very hard to figure out from the flower that he was being threatened. I sort of just pictured it as sort of this poetic like, we know where you live, and here's a reminder
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Maybe they did talk to him earlier, but yeah, I think it made sense when you were talking about like maybe this is so his wife doesn't find out. But it just didn't make sense to me. His character, I kept establishing he was a good person. He was very moral. It didn't make sense for him to be someone who would just like knowingly do these things. So I thought I had to stick with that and have him be like unwittingly involved in this.
Well, it is fun to know that you would have, like, if we had talked to him, if we had, that we could have gotten him safe. But I do think, like, that's part of what worked about the pacing. Like, he was kidnapped at the end, and Watson's like, if he's in danger, you should say something. We didn't say something. He got kidnapped. It felt like danger was escalating, and if we didn't
Yeah.
act soon, we were going to be in trouble.
That was the artificial time limit. That was like,
That's
yeah, sure,
right.
it's as long as we want, but the longer this goes on, someone's gonna get kidnapped or something like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Uh, what were your favorite parts about the process? What did you enjoy the most?
I mean, I loved it was just so much fun watching every week. I didn't know where it was going to go. So like I was just like everyone else, I was sort of following the story too. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I knew possibilities. I had like a few in my head, but I didn't know like who are they going to go see next and what are they going to figure out. And it was really fun to kind of like some of the letters were just spontaneous. I didn't really think we were going to go there. Like I didn't think Abernathy was going to be like addicted to opium when I started this or
Uh-huh.
anything like that. So that was a fun direction to kind of go in. Actually, I really wanted that was a good one because I think Debbie mentioned in the chat that Watson was a doctor who had experienced Afghanistan with opium and that he'd seen it. So that was a really good way to get him invested in the story. I really like that that was pointed out, so I could kind of get him like involved a little bit. And he ended up being a doctor in a lot of this too, which is really great. And so I really wanted to reward choosing Watson to go see Abernathy because he was a
Oh,
doctor
good.
and figured out that he had. If it was someone else, if he said Eddie up there, he wouldn't have figured it out. He would have just been like, he
Oh,
was acting
nice.
weird. He was like tapping his hand. He was kind of strange. I don't know what was going on. Just like with Thorn, I sort of let the same clues with him that he was like jittery and sweating a little bit. Um, yeah.
And what about, let's see, do you think you can estimate how much time you spent on this?
Yeah, quite a lot of time, but like I sort of got into a good flow with it. I think like um, maybe a couple hours or an hour or two for each letter, and each part letter in the package. Um, I think like maybe I'd probably just get home from work one evening and just write like all of them, or maybe two out of three of them, and do the next one tomorrow. But I did most of them in like a night or two. I really did write them like as much as I could, like free flow. Like I didn't really like I did get stuck on a few parts, but like I tried to like just think about the characters and what they might do, and I wasn't too worried about like future planning about what would happen next. I just wanted to just be consistent with everything that's happened so far. Um, so try not to get too hung up on things, which actually very much helped at the very beginning when you were like, "This might be bad, everyone. This might not be good." So just to help put the bar low, so I wouldn't be too nervous about perfecting it because I do have a little bit of a perfectionist tendency sometimes. So it's good to kind of let that go and
Well,
just have fun with it.
you've far exceeded my wildest expectations for the project for sure. Okay, I got a couple more questions. Uh, it sounds like someone already asked if if you were too stressed out watching us play it and were worrying about us making mistakes. It sounds like you really weren't. That really didn't get
Oh,
you. What about anything you would do differently if you were like, let's say someone else volunteers to do one of these? Any advice you would give to the next person who tries to write one of these, or to
yeah, I
yourself
will.
if you do again?
Well, there's things for myself. I think it's for things for in general. For myself, I think I probably should have done a little more research, maybe on opium at the beginning. I thought I understood it. I thought it was illegal, but I must have read something that was incorrect or wrong. So maybe a little more fact checking on that would have helped me. But I spent a lot of time researching as I went, but maybe at the beginning would have been more helpful, but I didn't really know where it was going to go. I think in general, some advice I would have is just not to get too hung up on like outlining, planning ahead. and just kind of let everything go where it goes. I mean, if this ended up being 2 letters, I think it would have been fine. And I would have been just a little disappointed that it didn't go longer, but it would have been kind of funny. You would have got a letter from Holmes being like, "You're trying to show off or something." So, but I tried to avoid that by making it a little bit more complex, so it wouldn't be too easy. Um, and but yeah, I wouldn't hamper progress. Like, don't do anything to like stop people from getting somewhere. I mean, I think that was maybe one mistake I made with Peter and the cab ride, but don't just be like, you can't go there because you're going to figure out the mystery too soon. Like, it's better to just go with it and let it happen if it has to happen. Actually, I was so afraid that this would end early. I sort of had a third objective that was going to be, obviously bring down the conspiracy. So I figured maybe you wouldn't get to that, but if you needed more time or just needed to keep going on or ended too soon, you could just be like, let's figure out who's behind it all. Let's go track down the person behind the conspiracy. But that kind of works with this kind of case. Maybe if it was like a more personal, like smaller case, it might be a little different. But you could always think of something, I'm sure.
Well, if there was, you're talking about, you've mentioned how we said to try to find Harrington, and you weren't sure whether we should find him, and in the end, you didn't let us find him. I mean, speaking as players, that nothing felt unnatural about not letting us speak to him. And I think as a general rule, I think that's completely fine. It didn't strike us as odd at all. And I think that might be helpful to know when you're running a case. Like, if the players want to do something that would give away too much, just don't let them do it. Because it didn't,
I mean,
nothing felt odd about that.
I came up with an explanation for it that made sense. I actually felt like it made more sense that you wouldn't find him. But yeah, it could have been just, I mean, maybe any of the other leads, for example, if like I didn't want you to figure out what the opium poppy was, maybe I could have just had, nobody figured out what it was. We couldn't find it anywhere. Things like that. The whole thing about like the silky substance on the flower, I didn't have to add that in. But I didn't want, that was kind of my major breakthrough for the week. I wanted you to figure out opium was involved. So, but
that was a fun moment when we said, it's opium.
So like the first letter was you figured out there's a scam. The second one, there's opium. The third one, I wanted you to figure out that there was like danger, that there was people who were trying to hurt people and like there were dangerous people, but we didn't quite get there. So I tried to like shoehorn into the fourth letter a little bit and make it more obvious. Yeah.
Two points I wanted to make. The first one, and this is what there's a word for when you get to the lucky accidents. I forget what the word is, but the fact that you were like that you thought opium was illegal, but it turned out to be legal, that actually added to it, because it wasn't, it gave us more to chew on. And we still knew, sure, criminals can be involved in black market stuff that's legal or hard to get at. And it worked. But the fact that it wasn't so clear cut about the illegality actually helped. It gave us more to chew on there.
Yeah. Somebody asked in the Discord, like, should we consider like what Matt knows about opium? And I just replied, I was like just trust your research, do whatever you think you know about the world and it'll become real. So
yeah,
that's one thing to do there.
The other thing I particularly liked, I think I mentioned this at the end, was that, first of all, I like the Dear Holmes has been starting to make this thing where Watson says, here are the questions I want you to answer. I like that we got this like at the end. That also was like a little signal to us, I think, that, okay, it's time to wrap up the case. Yeah. And he was like, okay, it's getting dangerous, but here are the 3 things unresolved. So I like that a lot. I also really liked that third question. You gave us a little reminder that there's a little bit of not purely solving the mystery, but you gotta decide how much he's culpable or involved, and Watson says, like, and what you want to do about it. And that was a nice moment for us, because it gave us this additional moral question that we tried to address in our letter. We were like, okay, we've made a decision that if he gets caught up, he gets caught up. At least we'll keep him alive.
Yeah. The final letter, there was a lot I wanted to do. But it was very long. I didn't want to add too many letters in. That's why Watson ended up kind of getting cut out there. I know it was disappointing to not have him in the end. Maybe the Discord will get a short message from Watson or something to get the closure. But it just felt like I didn't really like somebody said in the chat, he's busy. he's busy tending to all the opium patients. But I felt like
Or
Sherlock was kind of filling the role.
Holmes just walks in. Holmes wants the stage for the finale.
Right, exactly right. And Holmes was kind of clearing up everything Watson would have done anyway. He cleared up,
Sure.
wrapped everything up. But yeah, I would have been nice to have a letter from Watson. I'm not sure what it would have said, but maybe something just like "Thanks for all your help" in there. And I actually this is fun. I wanted to include a postcard from Amsterdam from Lomax, the last letter, but it just didn't fit.
Investigating
it was a very sweet
tulips.
ending. He went all the way to Amsterdam to look into the tulips, but didn't find anything yet. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all of my questions. What have I missed asking you about?
No, I got nothing else. I think that it was a good discussion. I really had a great time with this. It was so much fun, and I appreciate being able to do it.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. Anytime you want to write another case, Matt, you just drop me a letter.
I might. I mean, not anytime soon, probably, but maybe in the future I would do another one, maybe a different genre. But yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks for chatting with me. Exciting to try this first time chatting. It seems like it worked well. The chat has been mostly just dead silence listening to you. Raptured. Anna says, amazing, Matt. Thank you so much for creating this experience for us. And me says, it's been fun. All right. I'm going to let Matt go here. I'm going to sign off. Matt, thanks for talking to me. I'll see you next time. Yeah.
Bye.
All right. So there you have it. Technically flawless. Hopefully the audio levels were reasonable. This has been a huge pleasure. Fascinating that we got to try something new. Fascinating to hear Matt's perspective as the writer of this case. All right, well, let's not let's end on a high note. I'll see you guys on the next video. We're gonna be, don't get your hopes up. That's all, not all gonna be this smooth technically and as an experience. It's okay to have some rough points. I had a blast. I'll see you guys on the next stream.